Welcome back and welcome to part 2 of this Blender tutorial series where we're going to be sculpting this male stylized face. If you haven't seen the previous part where we sculpted the face, definitely check that out with the links in the description. And in this part we're going to be doing some vertex painting to paint the skin, and then we'll be doing the skin material, and we'll be doing the lighting, and we'll also give the character a little bit of a pose and then get the final render. And if you're enjoying this tutorial series and you'd like to help support me and this channel, then a great way to do that is by checking out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, where you can get access to lots of Blender content like 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node modifier setups, and lots more Blender content on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. So if you'd like to make a one-time purchase of one of my products, my Gumroad store is a great place to do that, or if you'd like to help support the channel monthly and get access to lots of Blender content, then my Patreon page is a great way to do that, and I do appreciate all of your support. And after this video, if you'd like to learn more about sculpting in Blender, definitely check out my Blender sculpting tutorial playlist where I have more sculpting tutorials. So we're going to start by vertex painting the skin. So let's select the mesh, and we're going to click right here on object, and we're going to change this to the vertex paint. Now let's press the T key to open up the side panel here, and what I want to do is click here on this draw brush. So we can now choose the color that we want for the skin. So let's go right here to this color, and you can use whatever color you want for the skin. I have a specific color that I like, and the hex value of this color, if you want to use the same color that I'm using, is A5764E. So now what you can do is press Ctrl X, or you can click here on paint, and then you can choose set vertex colors, so Ctrl X, and that's going to fill that color. So now let's choose the color that we want for the lips, and if you want to use the same exact color that I'm going to be using, you can go to the hex value, and you can punch in 8A5838. Alright, so I've brought back my drawing tablet right here on my desk, so I'm just going to zoom in here. We're just going to start to paint the lips with that other color. So let's zoom in here, and we can just start to paint along here. So the lips are just going to be this slightly different color. So I'm just going to paint along here. I have chosen the draw brush here. Let's go along here, and we're just going to paint this in. We're really not going to do too much vertex painting. Most of the object we're just going to leave as the base skin color. Let's just go along here and kind of paint this. Now if you wanted to, you could paint in like freckles, or you could paint more things on the skin, but I'm just going to do a pretty simple skin painting. Let's also go right here, and right in here we can go around where like the tear ducts are and kind of paint that in with that different color. And while you are painting, if it is not mirroring it over to the other side, you need to make sure you click on this X here so that it mirrors it over to the other side. Now one other small thing that I noticed is you can see right here the eyes are kind of coming through. So what we're going to do is change the vertex mode back to the object mode, and let's select the eyes, and we'll go into edit mode, and I'm just going to scale the eyes down so they're a tiny bit smaller. Just going to be a tiny bit smaller. That is better. Alright, so I now want to actually get into making the materials. So if I click right over here, go to the render properties, I'm going to be using the Cycles rendering engine. You could definitely use Eevee if you want to, but I'm going for a more realistic lighting, so I'll be using Cycles. Alright, so let's click over here to go to the shading workspace, and I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view. Let's zoom in here, and we need some better lighting because this is super gray right now. So let's add in an HDRI. So if you click over here on the world properties, you can click on this yellow dot next to the color, click on the yellow dot and choose environment texture, and let's click on open to open up an HDRI. And I'm going to be using this Aerodynamics Workshop 1K HDRI. This is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com. I'll have the link in the description if you'd like to download it. And I downloaded the 1K version and the HDR version. So let's click on open image, and already you can see we have some much nicer lighting. Now also, let's click right over here to the output properties, actually here on the render properties, and I'm going to scroll down, and we want to open up the color management right here. And on the color management settings, I'm going to use the view transform of filmic, and we'll change the look to high contrast. And then also, I want to make the background transparent so I can't see it. So let's open up the film tab. Here's the film tab, and we're just going to check mark the transparent button. So it's still lighting the scene, but you just can't see it in the background. So let's select the object, we'll click on new to add a new material, and we're going to rename this material to skin, and then to add in the vertex colors, we'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the color attribute node. Color attribute, we can drop this down here. And then if we click on the drop down, this attribute here, this is the vertex painting that we created. So let's put the color into the base color. And now you can see there's the skin, and then there's that color there of the painting. Now, before I continue finishing up the skin material, I want to make this object easier to use. And so this object is very, very high resolution. So I'm going to add a decimate modifier to get rid of the extra geometry and make it less dense because it is a sculpt. Now, of course, if you wanted to, you could retopologize it and then you could UV unwrap it and texture paint it and things like that. But I'm just going to be using this vertex painting instead. I'm going to hold down the Z button though and move my mouse down to the material preview so I can see the skin. So to make this object less dense while still keeping the shape, let's click on add modifier. We can add the decimate modifier, and then here on the ratio I could type in something like a 0.4. So this is going to get rid of a lot of the mesh. You can see there's the face count, so we've turned it way down. Let's click on the drop down and click on apply. So now this is going to be much less dense, so it will be easier on your computer and easier to render, and it will be faster in the viewport. So if I hit the tab key to go into edit mode, you can see it still is pretty dense, but this is actually way less dense than what we had before when we were doing the sculpting. All right, so let's go into the rendered viewport mode, and I'm just going to be finishing up the skin by making it a bit more realistic. So here on the roughness, I'm going to turn this down a bit to like a 0.45, so it's a little bit more reflective. And then let's also open up the subsurface here. So the subsurface scattering, this is going to allow light to go through the mesh. And I'm going to turn the weight here to like a 0.5. And then on the random walk here, this is the subsurface type. I'm going to change this to random walk skin. And this is going to help it to look more like skin. So if I turn this up really big, you can start to see some of these thinner areas. It's allowing a bit of light to go through. So the skin looks a bit more soft and it kind of has that red look. And if I were to shine a light really close up to it, it would look even more like skin. You can kind of see the light going through the skin. I'm just going to leave the weight at 0.5 because I don't want too much of the subsurface, but that'll make it look more realistic. Also on this radius here, we have the red, green, and blue values. Here on the radius, I'm going to turn this first one here to 2, and that's going to add a bit more red because the top one is the red value. If I were to turn up really big to like 100, now you can see what the subsurface is doing. So if you turn up really big, it's adding all that red light shining through the skin, but I just want to leave it down to like a 2 so it's a bit more subtle. And then I think on this one here, I will turn this to a 0.1. So these are both 0.1, but then that one is 2. Now to give the character a bit more depth, what I want to do is add in an ambient occlusion. So I'll go to the add menu, I'll search for ambient occlusion, and let's drop this up here, and I want to drag the color attribute back. So let's Control Shift and select the ambient occlusion. If you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on Edit, you can go to the Preferences, and here on the Add-ons tab on the search, you can search for Node Wrangler, and you can enable this Node Wrangler add-on. So you can save the preferences if you want to keep that enabled, and let's close the user preferences. So if you hold down the Control and Shift key and then select different nodes, that is going to preview the node on the object. So I can Control Shift and select the ambient occlusion to preview it. So what the ambient occlusion is going to do is it's going to make a darker area in the creases and crevices. Now I want to make this a bit easier to see, so I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we'll put the color ramp here after the ambient occlusion. And I actually want to flip these values, so I'm going to put the black tab over here, and then I'll bring the white tab over kind of to about there. So now you can really see the effect of the ambient occlusion. Now I'm going to select these nodes and drag them back, and I want to mix these both together. So this is our skin, and then this is our ambient occlusion, and we're going to make the creases and crevices look a bit darker. So we'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a mix color node, and we'll drop this here. And then I want to put this color ramp color into the factor. And this color attribute, which is what we painted, that is going to go into color A. And I can Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. So you can see wherever the creases and crevices are, that's going to be this light color. Now on the mix type here, let's change this to darken instead so it adds the dark values. And then here on color B, I'm going to make this a dark brown color. And the hex value that I'll be using for color B is going to be 2F, 1C, 0C. So now you can see that these little creases and crevices look a bit darker, so that's going to give the skin a bit more depth. So we can put the darkened result into the base color, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And that definitely looks better. Now what I also want to do is add a bit of a noise texture just to add a little bit of surface bump, but it's going to be very subtle. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's drop this down here. And then with the noise texture selected, I'll press Ctrl T, and that is using the feature of the Node Wrangler add-on, and it's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. Now I want the noise texture to be placed evenly on the object, so we're going to put the object coordinates into the mapping vector. And then let's hold down the Control and Shift key and select the noise texture to preview it, and we can change some of the settings. So I'm going to turn the scale up to 30, I'll turn the detail to the max of 15, and the roughness I'll turn to like a 0.55 so it has a bit more detail. And then this lacunarity value, I'm going to turn this up to 4. And this is going to add some tiny little dots. You can see there's almost little dots there, and that's going to make it look a lot more like skin. So now I can take this noise texture factor and we'll put that into the normal to give it some surface bump. And I'll Control Shift and select the principled shader. Now there's some really weird shading issues. That is because I need to convert the black and white data here on the factor. I need to convert that into normal data that the shader can use. So I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for a bump node, and we'll put the bump between the noise and the principled. And then to convert the noise texture data into normal data, we want to put the factor into the height value. So now the skin looks really bumpy, but I want to make it much less strong. So I'm going to turn the bump strength value to a 0.05, so it's very subtle. So if I just kind of zoom in here, kind of into the reflections, it's very subtle, it's kind of hard to see, but if I Control Shift and select the bump, you can definitely see there's a little bit of bump there over the skin. So let's Control Shift and select the principled shader. So let's do the eyes now. So I'm going to select the eye, and I'm actually going to go back over here to the layout because I want to model the eye shape. So I'll go back to solid view, and I'm going to zoom in here, and I'll go into edit mode. And let's zoom into the eye, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key and select that loop right there, and then double tap the G key to activate the edge slide, and we'll just slide that down. Then I can hold down the Shift and Alt key and select that loop, and then just Shift select that loop. And I'll hit the E key to extrude this out, and then I can scale it down a little bit just to kind of pop the eye out a little bit. And then I'll also press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, and I'll click here, drag over, and click there just to place that there, so you can see the eyes are a bit more three-dimensional. And I think the pupils are a little bit too small, so if I go back into edit mode, I'll hold down the Shift and Alt key and select all the other loops, and then I can scale the entire thing up a little bit. And let's go to side view, and I think I'll bring them back just a little bit. All right, so let's go back over here to the shading. I'll select the eye. Let's click on new to add a new material, and I can just call this like eye white. And for this, I'm actually gonna make the base color a little bit darker so it's not super bright, because if it's super white, it kind of looks a bit weird. And then also this roughness, I'll turn down to a really small number, so it's quite reflective. Let's go into edit mode now, and we're just gonna select that pupil. And what we can do is click here on the slot. This is the material slots. So we'll click on the plus here to add a new material. And if we now click on the drop down here, we can just choose the eye white. So now you can see that's in the second slot there. If you want to do this over here on the side panel, that might be a bit easier. So over here on the side panel, you can see we now have two materials in the slot. So I now want to duplicate this material to make it separate. So we're going to click on this button here, which looks like two pieces of paper to duplicate the material. And this one we can rename to eye black. And then click on the assign button. So now we'll take the base color and we're just going to make this fully black. So we assigned that part to the eye, so now that part is fully black. Let's go back into edit mode, and I'm going to zoom in, and I'll hold down the Alt key and select that loop right there, and I'll double tap the G key just to bring that down, and then I'll hold down the Shift and Alt key and select all of these loops here. And for this one, we're going to have like a brown color. So I'll click on the plus here. Let's click on new to add a new material. Actually, we want to click on the drop down and choose the black eye. But then we're going to click on this button here to duplicate the material, and we can call this eye brown. And then with that part of the eye selected, we'll click on the assign button. So now on this base color here, I'm just going to make this like a dark brown color. Let's go back to object mode, and we can kind of zoom out here and see how that's looking. So I'm going to make it just like a dark brown, something like that. And then you can also change the pupil size if you want to. And actually I might make the eye a little bit brighter, but something like that. And I do think I want the pupils to be a little bit smaller. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and move my mouse into the material preview. Let's zoom in here and we'll go back into edit mode. And I can hold down the Alt key and select that loop of vertices there. And I can double tap the G key and we can just drag this up and down, maybe bring it up like that. All right, go back to object mode. That's a little bit big, so maybe make it a bit smaller. So let's now go back over here to the layout, and we're going to be modeling the eyebrows. So I'll press Shift C to center the 3D cursor, and then I'll go to the add menu. Let's go to mesh, and I can add a plane. And I'll bring the plane over here so it's kind of on the front of the face and scale it down. And then I'll hit the tab key to go into edit mode, and I'll bring the plane over, and I can rotate the plane on the x-axis by 90 degrees. And then I can scale the plane down and bring it up here and scale it out on the x-axis. All right, like that. And then what we're going to do is use some modifiers to make the plane go right onto the face. So what I'm first going to do is press Control 1. And if we go to the modifiers, that is going to add a subdivision surface with 1 level. And here on the viewport and render, I'll just turn those to 1. So now let's click on add modifier, and we're going to add the shrink wrap modifier so we can shrink wrap the mesh to the face. So we'll click on this eyedropper here as the target, and then we're going to choose the icosphere. That is going to be the head. So now what we need to do is change the offset here so that it's actually popping out. Now what I actually want to do before I change the offset is give it a solidify modifier to make it thicker, and then we can drag around the offset. So I'll go to the add menu and let's search for solidify. We'll add the solidify modifier. I'll press Control S again to save the project. So now I can drag the solidify, and we're going to make that much thicker. So just like that. All right, so make it a bit thicker. And then at the very end, I want to add another modifier, another subdivision surface modifier to smooth it out, because you can see the edges are sharp. So I'll click on add modifier. We can search for a subdivision surface modifier, and right down here you can see at the very bottom we'll just turn the viewport and render levels to 1, and then I'll use the object context menu and shade it smooth. And then at the very end of all these modifiers, I also want to add a mirror modifier to mirror it over to the other side. So let's click on add modifier one more time. We're going to search for a mirror modifier and scroll down here, and I need to use the axis to be the X one, because the X one will make it go back and forth. All right, so I'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to scale this down, move it over here. We can kind of bring this over here so it's not stretching quite as much. And now we can just model the shape of the eyebrow. So I'll scale these vertices down here. All right, bring these down here, scale them up. And then also, let's extrude this, so extrude these vertices. And then if you look here on the side, I want to push it back into the face a bit more. So if I go right up here to the shrink wrap has this offset, so I can push the offset back down. So now the solidify is kind of making it solid halfway through, and so now it looks like it's just coming out of the skin there. All right, so hit G to grab to move around the vertices, select the vertices and hit E to extrude, and we're just gonna shape the eyebrows how we want, maybe scale it down so it gets thinner as it goes down to the side. You can also press Control R and then left click and right click to add a loop cut. So I may add a few more loop cuts there and just shape the basic eyebrow. All right, so that is the shape that I'm going for. Now, if I zoom in here, the subdivision surface is a little bit low quality. So if I just scroll down here to the very bottom here, this second subdivision surface, I'll just turn the viewport and render to 2. So it's a little bit more smooth. I like that a bit better. So let's now create the material for the eyebrow. So I'll select the eyebrow and we can go into the rendered viewport mode, and we can click over here on the materials. Let's click on new to add a new material. You can just rename it to eyebrow. And this is a very simple material. We're just gonna make it kind of like a brown color, maybe a similar brown color to his eyes, maybe a little bit darker though. So something like that. And I can maybe turn the roughness up to like a 0.7 so it's a bit more rough. So what I now want to do is duplicate the sculpt and have 2 of them, and one of them is just going to be symmetrical, but then the other one is going to have kind of a different expression. So I'm going to select all the meshes and I'll move them over a bit, and then I'll press Shift D to duplicate, drag this over here, maybe bring them over a little bit. So then this second one here, I'm going to change it a bit to give a bit of an expression. So what I can do is just select the mesh here and we'll go into sculpt mode. And what I want to do is turn off this X button here, so the X symmetry. And I'll hit the G key to go to the grab brush. So now I can just kind of change the expression. So what I'm going to do is bring this eye up a little bit, make this eye a bit bigger, so he's kind of opening this eye more. Also, I can bring up this eye brow right here. So bring up the eyebrow without pulling up the eyelid too much. So you might need to pull that back down afterwards, kind of pulling up the eyebrow. And then what I'm going to do is also kind of pull up this side of the mouth. So he has a little bit of a different expression, and maybe this side of the mouth. we can just pull this down a little bit more. And right here on this eye, I'll bring this down a little bit so that this eye is just a little bit more closed. And this eyebrow, we can just bring that down just a little bit. And we'll be changing where the eyebrow is later. But let's just edit the sculpt first. All right, something like that. And then we can also make him kind of look like his head is turning by moving around the shoulders. So if I just drag these shoulders forward, I'm going to drag this shoulder forward, and then this shoulder here, I'm just going to pull this back a little bit, pull it back a bit farther, and kind of, without actually rotating the entire head, that would be a bit hard to do unless we wanted to like rig it, but we can just kind of pull these shoulders back and pull these forward, and it'll kind of make it look like he's kind of rotating his head. We can also rotate the entire sculpt as well. All right, something like that. It already looks like he's kind of turning his head and looking over this way. So let's go back over here to the layout if you like how that is. And then you can see we need to change where the eye is. So we'll select the eye here, and let's go here to the modifiers. And on the mirror modifier, I will click on the drop down and apply that. So if I go into edit mode, both sides are geometry. So I'll deselect everything. I can hover my mouse over this eye and press the L key to select the linked vertices. And I just want to bring this eye back a little bit and slightly down. And then if I press the A key to select both of the eyes, I want to rotate these eyes around. So to rotate each eye individually, I can click here on the transform pivot point, and I'll change this to individual origins. So now if I double tap the R key, you can see each eye is kind of rotating around. So I'm going to have his eyes kind of rotating over to the side and rotating up a little bit, just to kind of give him a bit more of an expression. All right, so that's pretty good. And then we also need to select the eyebrows here, and we need to apply the mirror modifier. So let's scroll down here to the mirror, and we'll click on the drop down and apply that. So now we can go into edit mode and we can edit both sides. So I think I'll select this side and kind of rotate it and maybe scale it up a little bit. Maybe box select this here, bring that up a little bit, just so that each eyebrow is a little bit different to kind of give him more of an expression. Let's go into the material preview and just see how that is looking. And then I want to rotate the entire head over a little bit, but before we do that, we need to click here on the drop down on the transform pivot point, and we'll change it back to median point. So I can now box select this head here, and we can rotate it a little bit, kind of move it over. We can now just kind of add a camera. But first, let's actually box select this head. We can rotate this over a little bit as well, just to kind of get a few different angles of our character. So let's add a camera. So I'll go to the add menu. I can add a regular camera. We can move our view to wherever we want the camera to be. And I'll press Control-Alt numpad 0 to bring the camera where we are. And I'll hit the G key, and then I can double tap the Z key to bring the camera in and out. Let's bring the camera out like this. And if we click here to go to the object data properties of the camera, I like to turn the focal length up a bit, maybe to like a 70, so that the camera looks a bit more zoomed in. I just like how that looks. And let's bring the camera a little bit farther back. And then if you want to go here to the output settings, you can also change the resolution by dragging the X and Y values. So let's now add some lights. So I'll go to the add menu. Let's go down here to light, and we're going to add an area light. And I can move the area light over here, and I can rotate the area light. Let's rotate that over so it faces the characters. And I'll scale the area light up a bit. Let's go to the light settings, and I can just turn the power up a bit. And I can change the color, maybe just make it like a very slight yellow color. And then we can duplicate the light by hitting Shift D. We can rotate this light over and make another light on the other side of the characters. And I'll make this one a bit brighter and maybe move this light up a little bit so it's pointed more down at the characters. We'll select the area light and we'll duplicate it again. And I just want to have a few area lights on the back as rim lights. So I'll put another area light here behind the characters, and let's turn the power up so it's pretty strong, maybe to like a 300. All right, we'll go into the camera view. We can put the area light back there so we have a bit of a rim light. We can also change the square type to rectangle instead, and this way we'll be able to drag the X and Y size to kind of make this rim light a little bit longer. So let's have a thin, long rim light. We can duplicate this light. We're going to rotate the light over, so you can double tap the R key, or you can also rotate it on the Z axis and make another rim light here on this side. And then something else that I want to do is go here to the world properties, and I actually want to turn down the world strength, and this way it'll make the lights a little bit brighter, or it'll appear as though the lights are a little bit brighter, because the world light won't be quite as bright, so kind of some of the shadows will be a little bit darker. So maybe I'll turn the strength to like a 0.7. Now, I also want to add kind of like a reflection in the eyes. So let's go to solid view. I'll go to the add menu. We can go here to light, and we'll add another area light. And this one I'm going to have kind of on the front of the characters. And if we go to the light settings, I'm going to change the shape here to disk instead, so it is a circle. Let's go into the camera view, and I can go into the rendered mode, and I want to move this light so that the eyes are reflecting it. So let's make it a little bit bigger, and we can turn the power up until we can really see the lights and the reflection of the eye. So you can already see that. If I zoom into the eye, press the H key to hide it, you can see there's that little light. So I want to move this light over until it's giving a nice little highlight there in the eyes. Maybe turn the power up a bit more. Let's turn it up to like a 60 so it's a bit brighter. All right, so if I zoom in here, you can see there's these little white areas, and that definitely makes the character look more alive, having that little white reflection there in the eye. So let's go over some render settings. So I'll go here to the render properties, and I'll open up the sampling. And here on the render samples, I'm just going to use like 200 samples because this skin does have some subsurface scattering. So it is better if we use a bit more samples. But if that's taking too long to render, you can of course turn the samples down. If it's taking too long to render, you could also use this in Blender Eevee. So if I change this over to Blender Eevee, you can see the characters do look okay in Eevee as well, but I like cycles a bit better. So let's press Ctrl S to save the file, and then I will hit F12 to render the image. Alright, so once the image is finished rendering, I'm just going to do a little bit of compositing. So we'll click here to go to the compositing layout. Let's choose use nodes. And then what I want to do first is go to the add menu and add a denoise. Now, if you already added the denoise in the rendering, in the sampling here, there's a render denoise. You don't need to add the denoise here, but I like to use the denoise in the composite because I find it works really fast. It's really quite fast. Now on the denoise setting, I am going to change the accurate to fast here so that it goes a bit faster. And then also you can hold down the Control and Shift key and select the denoise. That's going to add the viewer nodes that will be able to see the characters in the background. And you can press the V key to zoom out and Alt V to zoom in. Now what I also want to do is add a simple background. So I'll go to the add menu and I'm going to search for a blur node. We'll drop it here, and I'll Control Shift and select the blur node. Now we're going to take the render layers alpha and we're going to put that into the image because the alpha is just going to be the outline of the characters. So now I can add this blur. So on the X and Y values, I'm going to turn this up to like a 250 so it kind of blurs the characters. And that's actually blurring it a little too much. So let's maybe just try like 100 instead. That is a bit better. So now I want to go to the add menu and I want to add an alpha over. Let's add the alpha over and we'll stick it here after the denoise, and the alpha over image can go into the image. And then this blur image, this is going to go into the top image, and the denoise is going to go into the bottom image. So we'll just wait for this to load up, and you can see basically now the blurred image is in the background, but instead of it being like white, I want it to be black to kind of look like a shadow. So I'll go to the add menu and I can search for a color ramp, and we'll put this after the blur. Now I want to switch both of these values, so I'll put the white over here and the black over here. So this white tab, this one I just want to make like a dark gray, and this is going to be the background. So we'll just wait for this to load up. So now you can see there's kind of like a shadow behind the characters, but then the background is just this gray color, or you could make it a blue color or whatever color you want for a simple background. All right, so then once you like how the image looks, you can select the viewer node. You can hit the N key to open up the side panel, and you can go here to node, and then you can click on save this image. And I'll just save this in a folder on my computer as final render. I'll just save it as a PNG image, and I'll click on save as image. And there is the finished character. Now, before I filmed this video, when I was prepping for the tutorial, this was the result that I got, and I definitely like my first result better. I think I like how sharp the character is. I really made sure that like the edges of the character were really sharp, and kind of down here I made the chin really sharp and the jaw really sharp. So I definitely like that a bit better. And that's the thing about sculpting is less technical than other parts of Blender, so it's much more creative, so it's hard to get the exact same result every time. Every time I sculpt, even if I'm trying to sculpt the same head, I definitely get a different result. So I think some things to do if I were to improve this sculpt a bit more is to make the head a little bit more sharp and not quite as round. His head is quite round, whereas this guy's head is a little bit more sharp, and I kind of like some of the shapes that I got here in the head, and also just making the jaw a bit sharper and the nose a little bit sharper. But that'll be it for this tutorial, so I hope you enjoyed this sculpting tutorial, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to watch more of my sculpting tutorials, you can check out my Blender sculpting tutorial playlist with the links in the description. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.